Hello, and welcome to another episode of Where the Stones Have a Story to Tell, but this time we're not out in the field and we're not going to actually look at any stones. While we're waiting for the leaves to come down so we can get after some of the thicker part of the forest this fall and into the winter with some new studies, I wanted to do something different, change up the format a little bit, and do a book review. Earlier this year, as I was preparing for the Snake Cave series that I did, I reached out to Professor Harry Holstein, Professor Emeritus of Archaeology at University of Florida, Jacksonville. He's written a great deal on the topic of ceremonial stone landscapes. And in the conversation I had with him, he was very gracious with his time and very helpful. He recommended I read this book here. It was just released in 2023. He is cited in it. He is not an author in it. So I did that. And I thought if anyone is out there trying to learn more about what they're seeing, what they're researching, what these stone structures are, where they came from, why they were here to begin with, texts like this can help. As you can see, I've got a small library here, many more articles that I've referenced in my episodes, but this one is probably one of the more expensive books I picked up in this endeavor. It's about $80. So if you're going to shell out $80, are you getting something that's going to help? You could always go to the library if they have it and pick it up free. But I thought a book review might be interesting if this format ends up being of interest to folks. This summer, a new text came out, A Shadow Under the Rock, by Peter Waxman, PhD. If book reviews are an interesting format to you all, let me know. If not, that'll just go into background research. But Our Hidden Landscapes and it's really edited by Lucianne, Lavin, and Elaine Thomas. They are editors of it because it's really a compendium of a variety of perspectives around Native American stone landscapes. I'm going to break this series of discussions on this book into at least 3 episodes because this text comes in 3 parts. While Lucianne Lavin and Elaine Thomas, this book is really a compendium of 16 different authors and their perspectives, broken out into 3 parts. We'll cover part 1 today, and that is around and authored by modern Native American tribal members, researchers, and experts. Very interesting perspective. Part 2 is about really the academic side of the endeavor, and part 3 are actual research studies that individuals have done. And so we'll break this out into at least 3 episodes. Part 3 has a lot to it, and we may do that in multiple episodes, but today we will cover part 1, Indigenous Perspectives on the Meaning and Significance of Ceremonial Stone Landscapes. 3 authors, and the first is somebody, if you study this at all in New England, you'll recognize the name of Doug Harris. He is a well-known tribal historic preservation officer in New England, very outspoken. There are a number of videos with him in YouTube. And if you ever heard anyone, to include myself, use the phrase, "let the landscape speak for itself," well, in chapter 1 of this book by Doug Harris, he covers not only how he came across that phrase, but what it means to him. So that part is super fascinating, and we'll get to the next 2 chapters right after we discuss Doug Harris's part. So in the early 2000s, Doug Harris was involved in evaluating whether or not an area being developed as an airport in Massachusetts had Native American ceremonial significance. And the story goes, and it is told elsewhere, and this is going to be a small criticism of this text in part 1, 2, and 3. There are authors that are bringing information that's been published elsewhere previously into the story. I think for $80 you should be getting original material. But the perspective of Doug Harris in his own words, in a little bit more detail, super interesting. So the Turner Falls Airport project was one where there was some disagreement, if you will, between the team assessing the Native American significance and the archaeological crew trying to validate that or come to their own conclusion. So in this area, there were two parts. One was an encampment area that went back almost, I think, 12,000 years. They had traced different timelines to the usage. And they had artifacts, and there were things in that area that they found that validated it. Across the way, there were stone structures, and they were not particularly striking, but the native team felt that that was a ceremonial stone landscape, and the way the story goes is the architects came in and said, okay, well, we'll determine that. We'll dig 100 test pits, we'll find some artifacts, and we'll determine whether or not it had any significance. They, in fact, dug those 100 test pits and found nothing. However, that's not the end of the story. And it was in the course, I think, of this project where Doug Harris consults with, and he is quoted in the outset here, Lloyd Running Wolf Wilcox. And he was an elder and medicine man of the tribe at the time. And it was from Running Wolf Wilcox that Doug Harris got the phrase, let the landscape speak for itself. And he tells the story here, it's very interesting. Leaves the office, thinks he knows exactly what he was just told, until he gets out into the field in this situation. And in the distance, 15 miles away from the location that they were concerned about, there was a notch in a ridgeline. Again, most people wouldn't think twice about lining any of this up, but the team ended up decoding the exact purpose of the ceremonial landscape. And that was that on August 11th, 12th, and 13th of each year, the sun set directly in that notch. That happens to be the most important time around the Perseid meteor shower, which had ceremonial significance to the tribes at that time. So from where they stood in that landscape that they were trying to protect, they could see that through the notch. And that gave the federal investigators, anyway, the rationale to preserve the area as a ceremonial stone landscape and landmark, where the state archaeologist actually didn't agree. And it was in that context that Doug Harris ends up saying that he then came to really understand what it really meant to let the landscape speak for itself. So that's a fascinating element of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, Markings of Ancestral Pathways, a Native Perspective by Elaine Thomas. Now, Elaine Thomas is a Mohegan tribal elder, has done a great deal of research, and is now retired, but this text is interesting because she brings several pieces of information that I think helps any citizen researcher out there have a better perspective and understanding of what they might be seeing. So in this text, she brings up, and Doug Harris had brought it up in some of the videos I went back and watched in preparation for this, an origin story. You know I like origin stories. The origin story we had used on this channel came from a text, an article written by the Gages, Mary and James Gage, around the serpent and the seed. There are a number of different origin stories to how Native Americans came to understand and get the capability for agriculture. One was serpent and the seed. It was a serpent that brought the seed from the underground and provided it to the Native Americans, and then off they went. However, both Doug Harris and Elaine Thomas have a different origin story. She does discuss the grandfather turtle, which is a pervasive origin story about the earth itself, the structure of land in the earth. However, it is interesting to note that as she's talking about the markings of ancestral pathways and what's important to her people, she discusses the Southwest is the direction that corn was first brought to us by the Crow. It is the origin of our people. This is the pathway of our ancestors' beginning and spiritual return. We remember and honor their long journey to where we are today. And so it's a reference to the importance of the Southwest. There's a number of different references to that here. I'll cover it in time, but I think it's interesting. She brings up something that I think to me is a little puzzling in the overall narrative I've come across with regard to agriculture and the like. So corn did not seem, according to some archaeologists I've spoken to have been that prevalent here in the Northeast, certainly in ancient times. Corn typically would have been processed through a mano and metate, and that's a two-part stone structure that would grind the corn. Those tend not to be here that much, as far as I've found. You see more nutting stones, the use of nuts, and the agricultural side, I think, is fairly interesting. So it adds some depth to the conversation. I'm not entirely sure how to piece that all together, but we'll go to work on that as well. And then she touches on something that the next author in chapter 3 also touches on. And that is, as she's talking about specific areas, she touches on Mooship's Rock, the Devil's Footprint, Mooship, Connecticut. And so here we see now several authors talk about how in the time of the colonial settlement, first contact, it's clear that, any study of history will show that the people that came over were interested in, at best, displacing the Native Americans from lands they wanted to be on, but also converting them, suppressing their longstanding spiritualism. And part of that suppression was in areas of importance to the Native Americans and areas of significance. When you see it today, references renaming of those places to things that relate to hell, devil, things of that nature. So in this chapter, she states, Indian places were at times vilified by removing the indigenous place names and supplanting them with the devil's name. The word devil, given by European Christians to people and places that were of value to Mohegan, was a way of denigrating them. And I think that's interesting to note. And it's also interesting to note that those place names still persist today. And it was in really that exchange that we lost a lot of the ethnography that could have happened to better understand really what the ancient native people here were all about. With the Europeans coming over attempting to Christianize, they obviously were not trying to understand the details around the spiritualism of the people who were here at the time. So we lost a lot of that here, and this is why we end up trying to piece it together with snippets here and there. All right, chapter 3, the last chapter we'll cover today by an author, Nohham, Rolf, Cachat-Schilling. The chapter's name is Unseen Borders and Ways of Knowing, and Schilling is a Native American medicine person. Unseen Borders and Ways of Knowing Northeastern Algonquian Sacred Lands. So, a fascinating dimension to the understanding of what we see now for those citizen researchers are the types of lands that were sacred to them. And this is the first time I've really seen it put this way. So this is fascinating. Sacred land is of 3 types: cemeteries, ritual gathering places, and hunting and collecting lands. Hunting and collecting lands. So, cemeteries, relatively straightforward. Ritual gathering places applies to ceremonial dance grounds and earthly places of cosmology, ceremonial significance, such as certain caves, waterfalls, deep river pools, chasms, springs, and bogs. That line certainly underlines what we've found here, which is a deep relationship and spiritualism around various forms of water. However, it's the hunting and gathering grounds, I think, are fascinating because you see a dual purpose around the sacredness of those lands. They were not only sacred for their hunting and gathering, but you also see, as it states here, hunting grounds, collecting grounds, and prayer sites are all sacred and coexisting. This I focus in on because as we think about these landscapes and we want to understand their purposes, I've spent a fair amount of time in this particular forest in Foxborough. I've walked it with government archaeologists, other researchers, and along the way, it's clear that this forest has a significant number of prayer seats. That's been noted by several experts that have come through here with me. Prayer seats, U-shaped cairns. And what one of the archaeologists told me is that the U-shaped cairns were not simply, as we are to learn from the book Manitou by Maver and Dix, just about the training of shaman or the use by shaman for vision quests and gathering of energy and what have you. But they also, and this is something I didn't really understand, or this book puts in much better perspective for me, they also serve the purpose of hunting blinds, this dual purpose. So I found that fascinating. It's very consistent with the text of chapter 3. So to wrap up my review of part 1 of our hidden landscapes, I think rooting our understanding in the Native American mindset is critical. Obviously, that's sort of that is a statement that's master of the obvious. But getting the information directly through a text like this helps understand those of us who are out here finding things that no one necessarily sees or talks about or documents. Sites between here, others that do what I'm doing up in places like Vermont. The 3 chapters here help provide a source of foundation and understanding. So for that reason, I think this text is very valuable and worth the money. We're going to get into the next 2 videos on, in part 2 was really an academic perspective. Part 3, other professional researchers or amateur researchers have pulled together their stories of what they've done in different sites around the country and in particular New England, and that part is super fascinating. We'll get to those in kind. So let me know if you find this format interesting. I'll complete this series one way or another. May or may not get to other books in the book review format, but so with that, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.